This is the story of Marcus Elliot Hale and his wife, Leila Renee Hale. They had built something together, not just a life, but a version of themselves that required the other to remain legible. Marcus was the kind of man who loved quietly and completely, the kind whose devotion lived in small, unremarkable acts. The coffee left on her side of the counter before she woke. The way he remembered the name of every colleague she'd ever mentioned in passing. Leila was the kind of woman who had once found that steadiness beautiful, then familiar. Then, somewhere in the slow drift of years, suffocating in a way she couldn't fully articulate, even to herself. The tension between them was not loud. It was the tension of two people who had stopped asking certain questions because they were afraid of the answers, who mistook the absence of conflict for the presence of peace. What would unravel was not their marriage in a single dramatic moment, but the slow revelation that one of them had been seen far more clearly than the other ever knew, and that being truly seen, it turned out, is not always a comfort. The house on Aldermere Drive had good bones. That was what the realtor had said 6 years ago, walking them through rooms that smelled of fresh paint and someone else's decisions. And Marcus had liked the phrase, good bones. It suggested that whatever happened on the surface, the furniture rearranged, the walls repainted, the arguments absorbed into the drywall, the structure underneath would hold. He had applied that same quiet faith to his marriage. Saturday mornings had a particular shape to them. Leila slept until 9 while Marcus read at the kitchen table, working through whatever history or biography had accumulated on his nightstand. He would have her coffee ready, 2 sugars, a splash of oat milk. By the time she came downstairs in the oversized Notre Dame sweatshirt she'd owned since before they met, hair unbrushed, eyes still carrying the particular softness of recent sleep. It was one of the few times she looked entirely like herself, he thought, before the day assembled her into the version she presented to the world. "You're staring again?" she said that particular Saturday, pulling the mug toward her without looking up. "I'm reading." "You're staring at me over your book." He lowered it. Old habit, she smiled, not the full smile, the smaller one, the one she deployed when she was mildly pleased but not willing to show it completely, and turned toward the window. Outside, the neighbor's kid was dragging a bicycle across the wet grass. October had arrived without ceremony, the way it always did. They had been married 9 years. No children, by a decision they had made together early on and revisited silently every few years, like a document neither wanted to formally amend. Marcus ran a private investment firm from an office downtown that most people found unremarkable. Small staff, low profile, the kind of operation that generated serious money precisely because it attracted no attention. Leila was director of brand strategy at Callaway Media Group, a mid-sized firm that had grown aggressively in the last 3 years under its CEO, Daniel Voss. She spoke about work often, about the campaigns and the quarterly pressures and the particular exhaustion of managing creative people who believed their feelings were more important than their deadlines. Marcus listened. He had always been a good listener, which Leila had once described to her sister as one of his most underrated qualities. A sentence that, had she examined it longer, might have told her something about how she'd come to categorize him. "Voss moved the party to Thursday," she said, still looking at the window. The corporate thing. They wrapped both hands around the mug. "I know you hate those." "I don't hate them. You find them tedious." "That's different from hate." She glanced at him then, something briefly searching in her expression, as though she were testing whether he was being contrary or honest. With Marcus, it was sometimes hard to tell, not because he was evasive, but because his honesty was so undramatic, it occasionally read as detachment. "Will you come?" she asked. Of course. The conversation moved on to other things, a leak under the guest bathroom sink, a dinner they'd been loosely planning with friends for weeks, the question of whether to repaint the hallway before winter. Marcus made notes on a small pad he kept by his reading chair. Mila finished her coffee and went upstairs to shower. The morning continued in its ordinary way, accumulating small moments that would not be remembered individually, but whose collective texture made up the fabric of a shared life. What Marcus noticed and did not mention was the way she'd said Voss's name, not with emphasis, not with anything so readable as warmth. It was the absence of inflection that caught his attention, the careful neutrality of someone who had learned to say a word without letting it carry weight. He had been a careful observer his entire life. It was in many ways the source of everything he had built, the ability to read a room, a balance sheet, a person, without revealing what he'd understood. Leela had always appreciated his steadiness without fully considering what steadiness required. It required attention. It required watching. And Marcus Hale had been watching his wife for 9 years with the same patient, unhurried focus he applied to every investment he'd ever made. He turned back to his book. The morning held its shape. The Callaway Media Party was held at a venue downtown called the Meridian Converted Warehouse, Bones dressed in expensive lighting, the kind of place that tried to suggest both industrial authenticity and corporate success simultaneously. Marcus arrived with Lila, took a glass of something amber from a passing tray, and began the quiet work of observation. He was good at events like this, not in the way that Leila was good at them. She moved through rooms with the easy social fluency of someone who genuinely drew energy from other people. But in a different way, Marcus could stand at the edge of a conversation and become nearly invisible, which was a skill more useful than most people recognized. He watched his wife work the room. She was good at it. She knew which conversations to enter and which to leave, knew how to make a junior employee feel seen and how to make a senior one feel respected without becoming obsequious. He had always admired her social intelligence. In the early years of their marriage, he had told her so often. At some point, he had stopped, not because he felt it less, but because it had started to feel like describing the weather, a fact so established it no longer required acknowledgement. Daniel Voss was exactly what Marcus had expected from Leela's descriptions, though her descriptions had always been professionally framed. Late 40s, slightly too confident in his posture, the kind of man who had been told he was compelling often enough to have built an identity around it. He was not unattractive. He moved through his own party with a particular kind of ease that Marcus recognized as the ease of a man who believed himself to be the most important person in any room he entered. Marcus had encountered the type often in his professional life. They were predictable in certain ways, vulnerable in others. He watched Daniel Voss touch his wife's elbow when he greeted her. He watched Leela's posture change, a small, barely perceptible softening, the slight angle of her body orienting toward him the way a plant orients toward light. Marcus drank his drink. 40 minutes later, he stepped outside onto the venue's side terrace for air, following a loosely justified instinct. The terrace overlooked a small garden and was lit by Edison bulbs strung between iron posts. There were a few other guests out there, smoking or taking calls. Marcus moved to the far corner and stood with his back to the wall. Through a floor-to-ceiling window to his left, he had a partial view of an interior corridor. It was not a private space exactly, but it was quieter. The far edge of the party. A remove from the noise. He saw them before they saw that they could be seen. It was not a long kiss. That detail, in retrospect, would feel relevant. Not a lingering cinematic thing, but something briefer, more habitual. The kind of contact that implied familiarity. That spoke of something that had already been established and was simply being confirmed. Leela's hand on Voss's lapel, his hand at the small of her back, her face tilted up, his tilted down, and then the moment, and then her stepping back, adjusting something at her collar, saying something to him with a small, private smile. Marcus observed all of this with the same stillness he brought to everything. He was aware that his heart rate had changed. He was aware of the cold through his jacket and the muffled bass of the music inside. He was aware of his own breathing and the weight of the glass in his hand, and something moving through him that was not rage. Not anything so simple or combustible as rage, but something older and more architectural, like a support beam discovering, quietly, that the weight above it has shifted. He finished his drink. He went back inside. For the rest of the evening, he was exactly the same as he had always been. He found Lila near the canapé table. He asked if she wanted another drink. He laughed at someone's story about a conference in Denver. He shook Daniel Voss's hand and held eye contact for exactly as long as was appropriate and said it was a lovely event. which it was by most measures. On the drive home, Leela talked about the evening, the politics of who had spoken to whom, a colleague who'd had, clearly, too much wine. She was in high spirits, slightly loose with the night. "Did you enjoy yourself?" she asked. "I did," Marcus said, and meant it in a way she would not have understood. She reached over and briefly touched his hand on the gear shift, then turned to look out the window at the city moving past. It was an automatic gesture, the kind that had grown up between them over years, and he let it happen. The streetlights came and went. "You know," Lila said, looking at the dark outside, her voice going a little abstract, the way it did when she was half talking to herself. "Sometimes I feel like I'm being watched. Not in a bad way, just like," she paused, "like someone is paying very close attention and I can't tell if that's comforting or not." She laughed a little at herself. "Actually, whoever's reading this, I don't know. Maybe like this story, or subscribe or something." A silence. "What?" Marcus said. She blinked, shook her head as though a sound had gotten in through a window she thought was closed. "Nothing. I don't know why I said that." They drove the rest of the way home in quiet. He waited 11 days. Not out of cruelty or strategy, at least not primarily. He waited because he needed to understand with some precision what he was feeling before he said anything, and because the thing he was feeling was complicated enough that he wanted to be accurate about it. He had always believed that the most dangerous thing a person could do in an emotional moment was speak before the emotion had resolved into something true. What he felt was not simply betrayal, though that was present, clean and solid at the center of everything. What he felt, more surprisingly, was a kind of grief for himself, for the version of Marcus Hale who had continued, right up until that moment on the terrace, to believe that the structure was sound. He told her on a Tuesday evening. They were in the kitchen after dinner, Leela rinsing dishes while he put away leftovers. And he said, without build-up, without any particular shift in tone, "I saw you with Daniel at the party." She went still. The water ran for a moment longer than necessary. Then she turned it off. She turned around slowly, drying her hands on the kitchen towel with a deliberateness that he recognized as a woman buying herself a few seconds to decide who she was going to be in this conversation. "Marcus, you don't need to explain the logistics," he said. "I'm not asking for a timeline." She looked at him, and something in her face, the particular mix of guilt and defensiveness and a strange, involuntary relief, told him more than whatever she might have said. It is a strange thing about discovery. It rarely reveals the thing itself so much as it confirms a shape you had already been tracing in the dark for months. "It's not," she started. "It wasn't, Leela." She closed her mouth. He leaned against the counter with his arms loosely at his sides, not performing calm but genuinely operating within it, which he understood from the look on her face was perhaps more frightening than anger would have been. "I want to understand something," he said. "Not what happened. I want to understand whether you've been unhappy. With me. With this." She was quiet for a long moment. He watched her pull something together internally. The specific effort of a person trying to translate a feeling they have avoided examining into words. "I don't think it's about unhappy," she said finally. "What's it about?" "I think," she looked at the towel in her hands, "I think I stopped feeling real to you. Somewhere. I don't know when. I started feeling like furniture, like something you accounted for rather than someone you." She didn't finish. He didn't rush her. "I know that's not fair," she added. "It might be accurate," Marcus said. She looked up. "I got quiet," he said. "I know that. I stopped saying things I assumed you knew. That's a form of taking someone for granted too, even if it doesn't look like neglect." He paused. "I'm not saying it justifies anything. I'm saying I'm not interested in being blameless." What she had wanted, he thought, watching her face, was for him to either explode or collapse. Both would have given her something to react to, something to define herself against. His equanimity was a kind of pressure she didn't know how to relieve. "Are you going to leave?" she asked. "I don't know yet. What do you know?" He looked at her. really looked the way he had looked that Saturday morning over his book, the way he had been looking for 9 years with an attention she had come to mistake for passivity. "I know that I loved you in a way that was probably too quiet to survive your need to feel it," he said. "And I know that's worth grieving, whether or not we do it together." She sat down at the kitchen table and put her face in her hands, not dramatically, but with the exhaustion of someone who has been holding a difficult thing for a long time and has finally been given permission to set it down. He made tea. He placed a cup in front of her and took his to the other side of the table, and they sat that way for a while in the kitchen, with the quiet of the house around them. Two people who had loved each other imperfectly and were only now beginning to afford the other that complexity. What people understood about the Callaway media restructuring 5 months later was that it had been triggered by a compliance audit, routine initially, then increasingly not. What they understood less clearly was that the audit had been initiated not by the board but by a shareholder filing, the kind that required a controlling stake to compel, the kind that Marcus Elliott Hale had been quietly in a position to compel for almost 2 years. He had said nothing about it to Lila, not as a strategy exactly, or perhaps not only as a strategy. He had learned in the years since his father had taught him the basics of investment that the most valuable thing about real power was that it did not require announcement. He had been a silent partner in Callaway Media since before Lila had taken the director position. He had never told her because it had never felt relevant. Then, for a period, he had not told her because watching someone navigate a world without knowing you can see all of it was a strange and clarifying experience. Then, after the party, he had not told her because the information had become a different kind of fact. The audit surfaced what audits at organizations under men like Voss generally surface. Not catastrophic criminality, but the steady, corrosive accumulation of small corruptions. Vendor contracts that quietly enriched consultants with personal relationships to the CEO. Travel expenses that did not withstand scrutiny. A culture of informal decision-making that had insulated itself from accountability. None of it was uncommon. None of it was survivable when someone with a controlling stake decided that governance mattered. Voss was not fired. He was managed out, slowly but unmistakably, with a kind of institutional choreography that replaced the man while appearing to reorganize the structure. A new executive committee, a shifted reporting relationship, a performance review whose subtext was clear to anyone fluent in the language of corporate consequence. Lila watched all of this from her seat at the director level. She and Marcus had been living in the same house for the 5 months since the kitchen conversation, separated by a silence that had expanded to occupy the spare room and then, gradually, the entire architecture of their days. They were civil, they were careful. They shared meals sometimes, passed information about logistics, asked after each other's weeks with the measured concern of people who had once known each other completely and were now navigating a strange, reduced intimacy. She did not know about the stake. She had heard that a shareholder action was driving the restructuring and had assumed, as most people at her level assumed, that it was institutional investors responding to stock performance. She watched Daniel Voss diminish and felt, to her own confusion, not relief but a specific kind of grief. Not for him, she told herself, but for whatever idea of herself she had briefly occupied around him. Her sister Rachel called on a Thursday. "You sound hollow," Rachel said. "I'm fine. You've been saying that for 4 months. Because it's been true. What happened with the thing at work, the CEO thing?" "He's being pushed out. Restructuring." Lila was quiet for a moment. "It's strange. I keep trying to figure out who would have the leverage to move a board like that. Nobody's been forthcoming about the shareholder filing." "Maybe it doesn't matter," Rachel said. "It feels like it matters. I keep feeling like I'm missing something." What she was assembling in those months was a self-narrative, the inevitable human project of explaining one's own behavior in terms that preserved one's dignity without requiring one to fully account for the damage. She had been neglected. She had been starved of feeling real. She had made a mistake, yes, but she had made it from an understandable hunger. These were not lies exactly. They were true as far as they went. What they omitted was the part where she had been so focused on what she wasn't receiving that she had stopped looking clearly at what she had. Marcus, for his part, was doing his own rebuilding. He had moved out in the 4th month. Not dramatically, without a scene, carrying his things across 2 weekends and leaving the house on Aldermere Drive with its good bones intact. He had taken very little. He had found an apartment with high ceilings and too many windows and had spent several weeks simply sitting in the unfamiliar light, getting used to the specific texture of his own solitude. He was not unharmed. That was the thing he had to keep reminding himself of, because his own composure made it easy to mistake his functioning for healing. He woke some nights at 3 in the morning with the precise image of Lila's face tilted up in that corridor. Not with anger exactly, but with the particular ache of someone who has understood, at a cellular level, that they were not enough. He had been a good husband, that was true. He had also been an absent one in the way that quiet people are sometimes absent. Present in body, present in steadiness, but retreated somewhere behind glass. Loving in a frequency his wife had eventually stopped being able to hear. Both things were true. He was learning to hold them both. They met for coffee 8 months after the kitchen conversation. Lila had asked. He had agreed without deliberation, which surprised him. He'd expected to hesitate, to need to prepare himself. But when the message came, he'd simply replied, named a place, named a time. Perhaps he had been ready, in the way that you become ready for things without noticing, the readiness accumulating quietly in the background while you attend to other things. The cafe was neutral territory, a place neither of them had history with, midway between 2 lives that had now fully separated. She was already there when he arrived. She looked different was not quite the word. Refined, perhaps, in the way that difficulty refines people, some softness around the eyes, a way of holding herself that was slightly less armored than he remembered. He sat. She asked about his apartment. He said it was fine. He asked about work. She said the transition had been rocky but stable. Then she said, I know about Callaway. He held her gaze without confirmation or denial. Not from anyone there, she added. I went through the shareholder filing myself. Once I knew what I was looking for. She paused. It took me a while to find the holding company structure, but she made a small gesture that meant, I found it. Okay, Marcus said. You were our investor. Yes. She turned her cup on the table, a slow quarter rotation. For how long, before you took the director role? She absorbed this. He watched her working through what it meant, not just the boardroom mechanics, but the personal geometry of it. The revelation that the man she had thought of in her private accounting as the predictable background of her life had been operating in her professional world with a knowledge she'd never had access to. Did you engineer it? She asked. The restructuring. Did you do it because of what you saw? He considered the question honestly. I did it because there was cause to do it, he said. The audit found real problems. That's not quite an answer. No, he agreed. It's not. She looked at him for a long moment. He could see her trying to locate her feeling about this, whether she was angry or frightened or something else that didn't have a clean name. He felt no particular need to fill the silence. I've been telling myself a story about us, she said finally. About what happened, about what I needed and what I didn't get. I know. I think the story is true, she said. I think I was real in what I felt. I was genuinely. She stopped. But I think I made you a character in it. I think I looked at you and saw what I decided you were, and I stopped looking. She said it quietly, without self-flagellation, the way someone delivers a finding they've arrived at honestly and no longer have a use for defending. I did the same thing, Marcus said. Not the same. No, he said, not the same. They sat with that distinction. It was the most honest thing they had managed in some time, the acknowledgement that they had each failed the other in different directions, to different degrees, with different consequences. It was not absolution, it was more valuable than absolution. I keep thinking about something you said, Lila said. In the kitchen, about loving me too quietly. Yes. I've thought about whether I would have heard it if it had been louder. She looked at the window. I don't know. I honestly don't know. Neither do I, Marcus said. Outside, the street was doing what streets do. Ordinary traffic, ordinary city, a woman walking a dog, a delivery truck double parked with mild inconvenience. The world entirely uninterested in the weight of what was happening at a small table inside, which was as it should be, Marcus thought. This was not the kind of thing that required an audience. Are you okay? Leela asked. I mean, genuinely. He thought about it. I think so, he said. I think I will be. He paused. Are you? She smiled. Not the small, withheld smile he remembered from Saturday mornings, but something tireder and more honest. I'm working on it. He finished his coffee. She finished hers. They talked for a little longer about nothing in particular. The winter coming, a book she'd read, something briefly funny about a shared acquaintance. The conversation found its natural end without ceremony. They stood outside on the sidewalk. Thank you for meeting me, she said. Of course. She looked at him once more, the look of someone taking an accurate inventory rather than searching for something they hope is there. And then she said, I'm sorry, Marcus, for all of it. I know, he said. He meant, I believe you. He also meant, it changes less than you might want it to. Both were true. He had learned, in the months since the kitchen, that the most loving thing he could offer was the truth without softening, which was perhaps what he should have offered all along. In 100 smaller moments, years before it came to this. She walked toward the parking garage. He walked toward the corner. He did not watch her go, and she did not look back. And neither of these things was a statement. It was just two people moving in different directions at the end of something that had mattered very much, and could not be reclaimed, and did not need to be. He turned up his collar against the cold. The city moved around him, indifferent and abundant, and Marcus Elliot Hale walked back into it. Not repaired exactly, but no longer pretending that the cracks were not there, which was. He had come to understand the only foundation on which anything real could be rebuilt. Some things don't end. They just become something you carry differently.